So let's pray as we move through our service. Father, thanks that we can be together. Thank you that you're always here with us, that we can trust you. Thank you for the people that served yesterday and stood up tall for Jesus in Compton to serve a family. May you bless them, I pray. And also, Jesus, we want to welcome you into this room. We want you to lead our life in every way possible. Help us to learn how to surrender to you, how to listen to you, how to best emulate you in this thing we call life. And I pray you'd speak to each one of us today and challenge us, touch us, show us your love, and always give us hope. And pour that into our hearts, we pray in Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. Well, we're in a series entitled Community for Me and You. We've been here for a few weeks, and we're going to explore this subject all summer, and I hope some good stuff comes out as we do. Today, we're going to listen to Solomon, who's the wisest and richest man that ever lived. And even though he was already king, and he had amassed a fortune because of who he was and what he accomplished, he ran the strongest nation in the world. But for him, there was still something missing. And you see this in his writing as he thirsted for being right and answering objections and finding wisdom to give away to other people because of the blessing that God had given him. And the truth is, he wanted to gain through his works because he was a high caliber man. He was the best that had ever lived because of what God had blessed him with. Again, the smartest and the richest man ever. But the problem was it was all about Solomon. When you're that gifted, sometimes it's hard to settle yourself and submit yourself, and he certainly had that problem. But every now and again, he'd get things right. He'd get his heart and his soul in order and in touch with God, and he'd realize it's about God, not about him. And when he did, boy, it was awesome. But for him, that didn't last a long time. It just didn't. And when you think about that, how many of us stop and say at times, wait a minute, I need to get God back in my life. I have gone the wrong direction here, and I need to realign myself. Jesus, I need to listen to you. How many of us say that? It's so easy to become like Solomon does in a cyclical way over and over again. At times we can be like him, where we end up doing our own thing because we think it's best. And we go back to our old ways, and we fall back on what we used to do. It's easy to get in that place, especially when we face turmoil of some kind. And I think we all know that. And so Solomon's trying to guide us here today, and I think you'll enjoy it. We're going to start with the story today. I want to make you think, like always, the most important thing that happens in this room to me is that you have to think about Jesus in your own life. And I try to make sure that happens. It's not about learning from me. It's about listening to Jesus and going out of here and having to think about what was said, especially directly about him. But a story to start us off. You ready? I don't know what I'd say if you go, no, actually, we don't want the story. Can you just pass on the story? Nobody ever said. Imagine you're holding a cup of coffee. You, right now. When somebody bumps into you, causing you to spill what's in that cup of coffee. Just a little bump and just, oh, I'm sorry, and just a little coffee spills out. You can look at the carpet when the chairs are picked up, and it's happened a lot. Now, the illustrator says, you didn't spill tea. You didn't spill grape juice. You didn't spill soda of some sort. You spilled coffee because coffee is what was in your cup. If you'd had tea in your cup, it would have been tea that you spilled out. And the illustrator says, the point is here, whatever is inside your cup is what you spill out of your cup if bumped or shaken. He says we are each a vessel, each and every one of us, not unlike a cup. Looking from the outside, no one can know what we contain. Nobody knows what's on the inside of you or me. But when the events of life bump up against us or shake us up, whatever's on the inside is likely to come spilling out. So we must ask ourselves, what's in my cup? What's in my cup? Is it love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control? Or is it anger and bitterness and anxiety and impatience, mean-spiritedness, ill will towards others, faithlessness, harshness, or a lack of discipline. What is it, the illustrator asks? We might present to the world that we're full of one thing when we're really full of another. And I was really frightened to read that line because I know you. What are you full of? He says it's easy to fake it when nothing is bumping into us or shaking us up. We can have a smooth ride. But bring on a little difficulty, a little temptation, a little irritation, conflict, inconvenience, anything upsetting, and what's on the inside of our hearts, the heart of our hearts, is going to come spilling out. And I think we all know that. We see that in life. And it's an important issue. And I think Solomon is going to, I know he is, but I hope it touches you. So today, wise planning for your future, Solomon starts out in chapter 4 of Ecclesiastes telling us this. Number one, life is difficult for everyone. This is one of those truths of life. We all have proven it in our life. It doesn't take long to figure this out. But life is difficult for everyone. And he starts off kind of in a really, frankly, a weird way. He speaks first of oppression here in this chapter. And he gets a little bit dramatic and even a little scary, actually. It's kind of hard to figure out what he says in these first few verses. But he says, if we were never born, it would save you from suffering. Now, that logically makes sense. But the way he lays it out is very interesting. Look at verse 1 in Ecclesiastes 4. He says, again, I looked and saw all the oppression. And he's speaking of people in a general way. He's the smartest man. He gets the greatest reports. The world was much smaller then. And he said he saw it. He understood it because his mind was so quick and so aware. He saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. So all of life, he'd witnessed it. I saw the tears of the oppressed. And he's talking here about sadness, deep-set sadness in the hearts of people. And they have no comforter. There's no help in sight. And you know, if you went to Guatemala with the 17 of us that went 2 weeks ago, you'd be deeply impacted by what we saw, what we witnessed. When we fed people at the dump that literally have nothing, make $2 every 2 weeks at the dump collecting plastic and wire and anything that's valuable there to turn in. And you know, you go home and you open your own fridge and you just kind of get a little sick in your head. And then, you know, 2 days later, you're just back going, scrounging around, seeing what else. By the way, the word leftover, that ought to be, it's left over for a reason. Just get rid of it, unless it's spaghetti for 3 or 4 days. But it's hard to see that, to be with it for any extended period of time. At least for me, it deeply impacts me. And they have no comforter. It's like they're alone, he's saying. And he goes, power was on the side of the oppressors. And this is the way it is in life. And we all kind of understand that. And they have no comforter. It's a sad commentary for many, but it's the way it is in life. We know when we go to this one little postage stamp called Guatemala that Bill Gates can't fix that country with all of his money. And with the Amazon guy as well, 140 billion now, I think, since he just added some prime candidates last week. $120 for nothing except you can order and get it quick. I mean, it's just wild the way they make money. They can't fix it. They can make an impact, certainly with their couple $100 billion. They couldn't fix it. And we all kind of know that. And that's just one little part of a big world that is filled with poverty. And that's kind of what he's getting at here. He goes on to say, and I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive. That's a very negative statement. But he's saying this is his truth at this time. There's no more oppression for them. It's over. And then he goes on, he goes a step further in verse 3, and this is where it gets a little odd. But he says, but better than both, the living or those that have died. But better than both is the one who has never been born, thus never experienced life as we know it. Why is it better? He says, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. So they never see evil. They never see the pain of it. And he's making this philosophical statement. It's bold, it's negative, it's big, but this was his truth at the time. This is how he felt. But I think his main point here is he's saying, look, life is difficult, and it's not going to stop being difficult. And he's kind of saying, look, expect it, Prepare for it. Don't be surprised by it when life is really, really difficult. Somehow take stock of your own life. And certainly be grateful for the good days, but the bad days, live through them well. Stuff happens in life. Sandy and I are living through it right now with her dad. It's awful every day because his end is very near. And it's uncomfortable, it's painful. The thing that the girls and some of us are doing for her dad, it's very uncomfortable. But he appreciates it. It's hard. Now Solomon makes some observations about work and life. And these are the ones that hopefully will capture your attention. The first thing, number 2, is he says the truth is some function with wrong motives in life and in work. And the idea here is what motivates us in life is a big deal. And why we do what we do is a big deal. And what makes you tick is a big deal. Because he's going to talk about that, about one group of folks, really kind of all of us, and you either work through it and figure it out or you stay stuck. He says in verse 4, and I saw that all toil and all achievement. Now circle the word, if you're a note taker, the word all. Sort of encompasses everything. All your work, all your toil, all your hard work, all the skills that you've built to be profitable for a company or yourself or whatever you do, all that one can learn and prosper with, spring or come from, the motivation for, comes from on the inside of us, from one person's envy of another. Well, Mr. Negative, thank you very much for that. But he's saying that's who we are at the core of who we are. And if you're willing to look at that honestly and say, wait a minute, he's talking about me, not the person next to me or across the street from me. This is about me. And he's speaking of our natural human motivation. This is who you are as people, as human beings. There's a selfish nature built in each and every one of us that we care more about self than anything or anybody else. And if you're ever going to live beyond that, it's going to be because you listen to somebody else, and the somebody would be Jesus. That somehow you find a way to surrender your life to him as the Lord of your life. And you figure out he's just good for me, and he's good for others through me. And he can change my life, and he can give me some beautiful things in terms of eternity. He says, so I saw that toil and all achievement comes from, is produced by one's envy of another. Envy and competition is deep in our souls. That's what he's saying. This too, he says, is meaningless. And the word meaningless, we're going to see that a number of times, means a waste of time in life. They're just wasting it. And a chasing after the wind. And chasing after the wind be something you would fail at. Only little kids do this, and not for very long, unless they're flying a kite, right? But this is about experiencing victory and winning, if you will. He or she wants the most sales, the most toys, the most victories, and the most dollars. They just want to win. And there's motivation from within us to want to do that. Whatever metric you want to use, whatever issue you want to use, the thing driving this person is called ego. And we all got one. And we kind of know it. It's called ego. And they're concerned mainly with what others think about him or her. That's how the human condition is. It's not your fault when you feel this way, when you're motivated this way. It's who we are. And Solomon is trying to let us know, look, you got to work with what you got. When we're envious of others, our motivation is based on wrong thinking. And we'll never end up content living on that kind of motivation. Number 3, another option is some are lazy and refuse to work. This is the opposite of the envy approach. Instead of being competitive, some people just don't have any motivation or very little. And this would be the pothead category. The person just wants to get high. Now, some of you don't even know what that's talking about if you're young and you haven't, with it getting legal, it's getting harder to find somebody that hasn't smoked pot. If I asked everybody in this room that has never smoked pot to stand up, it'd be scary, and I'm not doing that. I thought that was kind of funny, but Ecclesiastes 4:5 says this: fools fold their hands. And what he's trying to tell us is he's illustrating hands that are non-productive, with minds and, just a life that's geared up to be profitable and to be beneficial. They do nothing with them. He says, and what these people do that fold their hands and they're lazy and they refuse to work, they ruin themselves. Interesting, a small economy of words here, but they destroy their own lives that could have been productive. Bad choices are made here. There are consequences to living a lazy life. Literally, the term means they eat away or at their own life. The idea here is you become idle. You stop moving. You accomplish nothing at all. They tend to end up disinterested, which is just as destructive as envy, just from a different vantage point. Doing nothing eats away at a person's self-respect and self-interest. It just gets to be a dark hole and unhappy. On the screen, Joe's going to throw up there Proverbs 10. I don't have to really talk about it. I'll just read through it. Lazy hands make for poverty. You end up with nothing. But diligent hands bring wealth. And that there's like wisdom that accompanies it. There's learning that happens when you're diligent. You move ahead. There's experience that's gained. When a guy, gal reaches 45, 50 years old, a lot of times their experience and their education come together. And they have great horsepower. And then you get old like me, and the horsepower just starts going down a little bit. You got all that wisdom, but just that was there for us old guys. Diligent hands bring wealth. And the idea is not uber wealthy, but the idea is success, and you can care for yourself. You don't have to be cared for by somebody else. Verse 5, he who gathers crops in summer is a prudent son. They're wise when they do it at the time it ought to be harvested. But he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful son. He embarrasses and disgraces himself and his family. Some are lazy and refuse to work. And then number 4, Solomon now points out that some learn to be satisfied. This is very powerful in my mind. The big question here is, what's enough? What's enough? What is it that will satisfy you? And we come back to this question a lot of times, but that's kind of what he's getting at. That's the fence we're looking over. What is it that will complete me in my heart of hearts? He says in verse 6, better one handful with tranquility. So he's kind of storytelling this, if you will, because you all get the word picture he's given us. But less while living a balanced life, you can experience peace in your life and be sort of at rest, not all tense all the time about everything. He says, better one handful with tranquility than 2 handfuls with toil. And the word toil is not just work, but it represents an overworker, a life focused on having more, and that's all that matters. A life out of balance, if you will, and chasing after the wind. Those who keep pursuing more for more's sake end up running after wrong things. We've seen it before. Marriages blow up, stuff happens, and wealth gets divided, and it's heartache all around. When life's out of balance, bad stuff happens. So what's he laying out? He says one person here has learned to be content or satisfied with less, one handful. And one person wants 2 handfuls and beyond, and they chase after riches and wealth and the having of more and more. Solomon was not opposed to hard work. He certainly lived that out in his own life. But he wants us to be content with what we have, to be satisfied with what God has given you. And that whole comparison thing can destroy your life if you play that game. Find satisfaction in what God has provided. When Jesus becomes enough for you, ultimately, when Jesus becomes enough, you can live with just one handful, enough to carry on and be tranquil. Now, let's stop for a minute. Let's think about that word. That's not a word I'd usually use. I didn't even know how to spell it. It has a Q in it or something. Tranquil. I mean, I don't know if I've ever said that 30 times in my life. But as I played around with it in my brain, I want you to do the same today. I want you to kind of get stuck with that T word. Let me ask you first of all, are you tranquil in your life? In the culture we live in, that's pretty tough to do. This kind of makes me think of being in Hawaii with my wife. And there's weeks left of the vacation, not the end of it. And we're sitting outside with sunscreen on. My arms are tan, but the rest of it, very white. And, I mean, just tranquil. What is it? Do you ever think you're going to get there? At peace? It's just a fascinating word. You ever use that word for yourself? That's what he says here. You can be that with one handful. Learning to be satisfied. Powerful point to me. Solomon now moves back to the idea that number 5, sadly, some choose to do life alone. They do life alone. Remember last week, isolation is toxic. The Harvard Medical Letter laid out clearly. Doing life alone isn't what Jesus wants for us. It just isn't. Check out what Solomon says. Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. And the idea is a waste of time and life. That's what meaningless means. Nobody in this room wants to be meaningless. Verse 8, there was a man all alone, a loner, doing life alone, choosing this. This guy had means. He didn't have to choose this. He just made this choice. He had neither son nor brother. He wasn't a dad, a husband, or a family man. The guy's a loner. There was no end to his toil. He worked all the time. That's all that mattered to him, what he had done and what he might do. It dominated his life. Folks, I love my work. I want to think sometimes I probably worked a little too hard, but I don't ever want to overwork. That chip isn't in me. I'm not a workaholic. I know. I was convinced decades ago that I can't fix anybody, starting with myself. But this guy, there was no end to his toil. It just, when he was awake, he was working. That's who this dude is. Yet, notice this, his eyes were not content with his wealth, with what he'd built. And I sensed there was significance. This guy had big numbers. He had more than enough. And I think the eyes comment kind of capture that idea of comparison, because that's what we do with our eyes. And it may get into our heart and mind, but he was competitive, and he looked at what other people have, and he did his eyes. He wasn't content. I don't even enjoy what I've earned, as he self-evaluated. I didn't enjoy what I earned. I want more. For whom am I toiling, he asked. He's getting self-reflective here. Who am I doing this for? Who am I overworking for? What's the deal? And why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? Why do I just work all the time? What's going on in my life? He's sort of getting honest here. But he is who he is. And often we fall back onto who we are rather than grow and move beyond it. I don't even enjoy what I've earned and achieved. And he says, Solomon tells us this too is meaningless. It's a waste of time and life. And he says a miserable business. Sounds like Scrooge, right? But it's not a good outcome. It didn't end well. A couple of weeks ago, I didn't say this in the first service because Jeff and Tracy were here, but they're not here now. They're home with their 3 boys under the age of 6, which is just nuts, by the way. Just want you to know. A couple of weeks ago, Jeff and Tracy had to take care of Papa because nobody could be there, so they went and filled in. And he's declining. You guys know, some of you anyway, rapidly. And Jeff was doing personal stuff with them, and Gilmore looked in his eyes, and he was helping him, like a man. And he said, Jeffrey, and he talks real slow and low. I don't know where he got Jeffrey from. I mean, it's Jeff. And he goes, Jeffrey, life is short, bud. And he so impacted Jeff and me through him. And it's the truth. Life sounds long when you say 80, 85, 90, maybe 92 almost. By the way, he's still single. See, that'll get me lunch. I'll never forget it. Jeffrey, life is short. Solomon confirms that isolation isn't good, that isolation isn't a wise way to live, that isolation isn't wise for your future. Solomon ends with number 6. And some use the power of community. You knew we were going to get here at some point. But he sort of changes the subject matter, hitchhiking off what he's just laid out, sort of in a negative way pretty much, but to what's wise for us and to how we ought to live. into what's best for us. In verse 9, he says, 2 are better than 1. This is a principle of life that will never change. We all kind of understand it. It's, okay, duh, I got it. Why? Because they have a good return for their labor. 2 can do more than 1, obviously. 2 can find encouragement where 1 is hard. It's kind of difficult to self-encourage. I mean, maybe you're good at that, but that's interesting. The message is we're just better together. And we all get that. It's a classic verse. He goes on in verse 10. He says, if either of them falls down. So the idea here is takes a tumble, a physical one. They're laying on the ground in some way. They maybe have some kind of heartache. And a heartache can just take all motivation out of your life when it's serious and when it's real. A loss of some kind that's major, that has a seasonality to it, that's going to take some time. You got to work through it. You can't just make decisions and it's over. Some things in life just aren't like that. And we all kind of know that. But so if either of them falls down, one can help the other up. One can throw him a rope. Or one can give him a hand, say, come on, man, and help you up. I've thought about having a contest between 3 guys that are over 70 and make them lay flat on the ground up here. And whoever gets up first, full standing, I'll give them a $25 Starbucks card. Because you don't understand, kiddos, what it's like to get up when you get older, especially when you're big. You know those martial arts guys that are on their back, Bruce Lee and stuff, and he just kind of, and he's standing up. I just want to say, you show off. Because it's hard to get up now when you're really on the ground. Just if you're past 60, try it today. Get on the ground and get your wife to have a stopwatch and see how long it takes you to get up. It's awful. That is the truth. That's the best truth that was told in any church in America. I got news for you. But the idea here is, man, we got lots of people living in our house. Stacy's there with 6 of her kids, and we're working through that. They've been there a full week now, and they've only got 5 or 6 weeks left. So Sandy and I are having dinner in our bedroom, and there's only one chair, so she sits on the ground, and she has her little, I said, are you okay? I mean, I'm thinking, should I give her my chair? And I'm thinking, I'm older than her. It's just a mess, me getting up. So we finished eating our dinner. She's on the ground. She was fine. And I said, no, don't get up. And I went over and I grabbed both her hands. And I go, okay, count to 3 for me. And I lifted her up. And I know how that feels because people help me up. It's a wonderful thing. We're sounding so old. Young people are going to leave and find another pastor. It's okay. You'll be all right. There's wisdom in gray hair. Never forget that. Never forget that. So he goes on, but pity the poor fool. It doesn't say that, but that's what he's getting at. The idea is feel sorry for somebody. And he says, but pity anyone who falls and no one to help him up. Being alone when you're down and out is not a good thing for you or for me. It's much easier to give up when you're alone than when you're with somebody, especially somebody who loves you and believes in you. Quality friendships minimize weaknesses, and we all have some. They can pick us up physically and emotionally. They can keep us in the game when we're thinking about kind of giving up or quitting. Not really, but the thought is there. The blue is there. The minor league depression is there. This is a very powerful message that Solomon is trying to give each of us, using the power of community. God wants us to understand that we need each other, that no man is an island, that we need to be connected powerfully. He goes on in verse 11. He says, also, connecting with verse 9 and 10, sort of like saying, therefore, also, if 2 lie down together, they'll keep warm. And the idea here is that this is a solution to something that is a basic need that we have to be warm, to not freeze to death. He goes on, but how can one keep warm alone? So he states the obvious. We all kind of understand that. One can't be as warm as 2 can be. The Navy SEALs, an illustration I read recently, learn early in training that the only way they survive is to develop the level of closeness and trust with their teammates that extends all the way to the most basic of human needs. During Hell Week, SEAL candidates are trained 24 hours a day, 6 days in a row. They are subjected to the cold water of the Pacific Ocean until they shake uncontrollably. And I've had this explained. Their body's uncontrollably shaking, all of them, arm in arm, sitting in the water with the waves hitting them in the back. From the back, they're sitting there after being wet and sandy. A wet and sandy is if they're wearing wetsuits, he'll say, go get wet and sandy, and they have to take their wetsuit down if they're wearing one, and they have to roll around in the sand, get wet, roll around in the sand, and put their wetsuit back up. That is full-blown abuse. That is just not right, but that's what they do. They're given 20-minute rest periods every 8 hours or so, and the only way they can find enough warmth to fall asleep for a precious few minutes is to place their shivering bodies as close as possible to their buddies to share what little heat their freezing exteriors can give them. They literally generate for each other life-giving warmth that provides momentary rest in the midst of their weariness. I heard from one SEAL that went through training after he passed buds and all that up in Alaska. And there was snow on the ground. It was really bad, and they had to get down to their underwear, 20 guys, and cross a creek with their backpacks above their head in their underwear. And then they had to they're out of touch. They're wet and they're freezing. And they had to get warm. And there was only one way to get warm. And this is an ugly story for men. But they had to depend on each other or they would die, literally. And they took care of each other. They laid next to each other in their underwear. And I know it's just weird. But the bond and the closeness that Navy SEALs have with other Navy SEALs is just, I don't know if there's ever any closer. Support under the worst of situations. That's what he's talking about here. Not that I want anybody to visualize that with you and somebody else. But Solomon goes on. We'll move on. Verse 12. He says, though one may be overpowered, the idea of overpowered is he'll be stopped. He'll be taken out. He'll tap out. Tap out. Stop. I give. It's over. Two can defend themselves. Someone has your back. Someone's on your team. You're not alone, is the picture he's given us. It's community. He says a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. This is how rope is constructed. Bigger rope has more, but basic strong rope has 3 strands, and it's braided together tightly and then tied off or burned or taped or whatever at the end so it can't be compromised. It provides strength and security because it doesn't give under strain. And that's the picture he's trying to give us of community. The idea here is you can know that you're safe if the worst happens. You've got a friend. If the worst happens, you're not alone. When you're alone, you're not near as strong as when you're with somebody. With quality friends, you face difficulty better. You just do. You have a place to run. You have a place to be heard. Your story matters to somebody. And you end up with the strength of another, not just your own. And this is the essence of community. So to close today, questions to think about. Number 1, which are you? Which are you? 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6? What are you? You function with wrong motives? You're lazy and refuse to work? You learn or learning to be satisfied? You choose or choosing to do life alone? If you're doing life alone, it's because you choose it. You can blame other people just so long. Or you use the power of community. You get to make a choice. So what I'm asking here is be honest with you. Be authentic with yourself. And say, what's my problem? Figure out, where do I need to work on things? And change where change is needed. Redirect, recalibrate your life based on what Solomon says. You got to do some self-evaluation and then do some baby steps. You don't have to tell everybody else. You're not going to have to turn this in unless you really need to. Number 2, why is being involved with POC, Power of Community, so much more productive? Well, it's obvious. 2 are better than 1, right? We're better together. This is a principle of life, just like the law of the harvest. You can't beat the law of the harvest. What you sow, you're going to reap. So when you sow good things, you reap good things, and a crop grows more than just one seed can grow a lot more than one thing. So when you sow a lot of good things, you can make up for some of the other stuff you sowed back in the day, right? At least some of us. The law of the harvest isn't going away, and neither is this principle that 2 are better than 1. 3 is even more productive, stronger. He talks about it. The team yesterday, they painted a house. They got there about 8:15, got going. It takes a while to get the paint out and get everybody going and pick a spot. So before noon, they're done. Now, what if I ask you to go paint a house tomorrow morning, start at 8, and you're all alone? Well, wait. First, you got to go get the paint and the brushes. You got to show up. How long is it going to take you? Why is being involved with Power of Community so important? Because it's more productive. Number 3, what steps could you take? This is your decision, by the way, to get more involved with POC. What steps? What are they? How can you start being with others differently? Some people believe that in their marriage, they have the Power of Community. I think you got a great marriage. That's wonderful. Nothing better than having a really good, above-average marriage. Nobody's is perfect, obviously. But that's community. But he's talking about a lot bigger community than that. And if you don't have any, oftentimes I'll ask somebody, who's your best friend? And if you don't have anybody, I would so encourage you to, I mean, outside of your husband or wife. And by the way, I don't have any girlfriends. I don't mean girlfriends. I mean girlfriends. I got guy friends. I'm not getting in trouble. I love women, just in general. You girls, ladies that I know that. But we ain't going to the show together. We're not eating food together, ever, alone, ever. It's not happening. I'll go out with John Reynolds anytime we can go out. There ain't nothing cute or sexy about him to me. Was that over the top, sweetie? Do I need to settle down? We're almost done. How can you start being with others? How can you start making a difference with other people? Because that's really what we want. We want significance, all of us. And maybe you have it from work and the life you've built. That's great. But how can I connect up? Maybe get some low-hanging fruit first. How about plan on going to the next Compton initiative? I don't know what the date is. I'll find out. We'll put it in the bulletin next week, but it's probably in 2.5 months. Just take a Saturday morning. Meet at the Compton Courthouse at 7:15-ish. Get a free donut if you need donuts, but that happens every Sunday. And then we go paint together with, let's have 100 people go. And we're done at 9:30 and we're at Starbucks at 10. Learn how to ask, how can I help? How can I help? How can I help? One of the privileges of our life, we've lived in 4 different homes, I think 5, I don't know, since 1988. But a lot of them were in the Riviera. And it seemed like we always had a next door neighbor that was older and somebody died or the process. My kids grew up putting food over, especially at Via Anita, over the wall, we called it. We'd make too much and we'd give her a plate and it'd have 4 or 5 different things. And, you know, when you're 83 and you're waning, you know, somebody like my wife cooks dinner, it's just so good and tasty. And my kids grew up doing that. And now we got a gal next door that is younger than us, and she's 93, and she kind of looks better. It's really sick. But we did bury Fletcher. Her husband picked him up about 100 times, but that's okay. Ask people, how can you help? How can I help? I don't think we ask that because we're afraid they might say, hey, I'd like you to do this. And we go, I don't know if I really want to do that. Here's what I'm talking about. Be a joiner rather than a cocooner. Because that's what is happening in our culture with our really clear HD TVs and Netflix and all that stuff. And be a J or a C. Be a J, not a C. Stop cocooning away and start joining. Whatever it is, whatever it might be. We'll close with this. One man wrote, do you have at least one person nearby who you can call on in times of personal distress that you'd bare your soul to? If not, you're going to be hurting. And I'm not talking about your husband or wife. I hope that's going on. Do you have several people whom you can visit with little advance warning without apology? They're just kind of there for you? Those are friendships that get built over the course of time. Do you have several people with whom you can share recreational activities, or do you do everything alone? It's not a sign of health for your future if that's true of you. So listen. Listen to Jesus. Listen to Solomon. Become a person who understands and involves himself in the power of community. Let's pray. Lord, thanks that we can be together. Thank you that you love us and that we can count on it no matter what. And I just pray as we try to listen and try to follow that you somehow would burn and sear into our hearts and minds that it's good to follow you. to listen to you, to adapt our lives to you. Jesus, thank you for being who you are, for offering what you've offered, and we just are so, so grateful, and we love you. In Jesus' name, and everybody said, amen. And go Tiger. Don't tell me anything, don't tell me anything. I know he's not winning, I know he's not winning.